Hey, what is up? Welcome to this episode of the Entrepreneur to Entrepreneur podcast. As always, I'm your host, Brian Lofermento, and I'm so excited about today's conversation because this is someone that I've been looking forward to talking to because she very clearly loves business. She loves technology and how AI interweaves with all of that. But what I really love is that she also loves how all of this stuff complements life. And that's why it's no surprise to me that not only is she a fellow entrepreneur, but this is a fellow podcaster, a fellow author. There's so many good things that we're going to dive into. So let me tell you all about today's guest. Her name is Deiadora Blanche. Deiadora is the founder and CEO of Deiadorebel, where innovation meets intuition to catalyze profound transformation in business and personal life. With a passion for holistic business development and ethical AI, Deiadora empowers entrepreneurs to elevate their businesses by blending emotional intelligence with advanced AI strategies. These are things that a lot of people want to pretend they're opposites, but we're going to merge the two of them together with Deiadora. Her work has been instrumental in helping conscious businesses thrive in a rapidly evolving marketplace. And before I welcome Deiadora to the conversation, I just want to tell you that when our team came across her website, we saw her top headline and we said we need to invite her on because her website at the very top, it says, simplify your strategies and amplify your impact. Work smarter, not harder. This stuff applies to every single one of us, no matter where you are in your business. So I'm not going to say anything else. Let's dive straight into my interview with Deiadora Blanche. All right, Deiadora, I'm so excited that you're here with us today. First things first, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much for having me, Brian. I'm happy to be here.
Heck yes, and I know that you are going to tell us about so many cool things about what you're working on, what you've been doing, your vision for the future. But before we get to the meat and potatoes, take us beyond the bio. Who's Deiadora? How'd you start doing all these cool things?
Yeah, I would say that how I got here was I graduated in 2005. I did a bit of traveling in 2006. And when I traveled, I had a business ask me, they were a local cafe in Perth, Australia, and they asked me if I could help them with their business on operations. And I was just working in the cafe and working with the local youth and everything. And I thought, what an interesting observation that they picked up on that in me. And that started me on a path of helping businesses to become more consciously aware of what they were working on and how they could improve their operations by being more mindful about that.
Yeah, I love that overview, especially because Deiadora, you're starting this off with all the great words. We're talking about things that most businesses don't think about. You're talking about businesses becoming aware and conscious. What do these words mean to you? Because they're so important in the work that you do.
Yeah, I think that a lot of the times we toss those words around like they're buzzwords. And I've listened to a lot of teachers and read a lot of books over the years from many teachers across all sorts of industries. Like maybe they're selling it as a growth mindset, or they're coming from a more spiritual place, or maybe they're like a motivational speaker and teacher. And what I hear a lot is using it as impressionistic language, which is where you're saying a lot of fluffy words, but you're not really saying anything. And that has driven me to be able to create frameworks and systems where you can really apply mindfulness practices to become more consciously aware of what it is that you're doing by practicing presence and breath work and meditation strategies like no mind to see really what it is that you're doing and be more intentional with your actions.
Yeah, I really appreciate that. It's funny, every single word, speaking of intentions, I choose a word of the year, and that is so effective at setting that intention for the word for me. And intentional was one of my words of the year a few years ago. And it's crazy because whatever you have top of mind, the human brain is so good at seeing the things that we're looking for, which is both a great trait when we're looking for the right things, but it's also a dangerous trait when we don't even know what we're looking for. We could be staring right at it and oversee it, which is why I love, you talk about mindful practices and especially, breath work and meditation. These are just things that make us more conscious and aware of the things that are in front of us. Talk to us about the importance of that, because Deiadora, I'll use myself as an example here. it took me too long. I started my first business when I was 19. I thought my success was going to be determined by the strategies I was using, the tactics, the conversion techniques that all the gurus talk about. But all of this stuff bleeds into one another. The way we live our personal lives also impacts business. So talk to us about that, because it seems like you're the entryway, you're the gateway for so many businesses to start thinking about these things.
Sure. Yeah. I like to think of myself as a catalyst, absolutely, an initiator of sorts. I would say that a lot of the times that we don't understand that we don't see the world as being interconnected. So the first step is really to understand that unity and all of this chatter about diversity and inclusion, really unity at the very baseline of it is not just being interconnected, but it's also about our individuality. So when you bring yourself to work, if you're a professional or you're an entrepreneur, you also actually have to have that awareness that your inner life is affecting everything outside of ourselves. And like you were saying, so many of our strategies can be because we're trying to follow trends, but it's not really coming from that deep connection between what we want to do and what we think is the most genuine expression of that. But when we bring awareness to what's going on inside of ourselves, we can actually observe where our motivations are coming from by asking yourself, what is my motivation for implementing this strategy? What am I really after? And you can ask yourself, intentional questions to figure out where that strategy is coming from and then actually choose what your motivations are going to be. I love to affect people in a positive way. So I took a NLP, neuro-linguistic programming conference. I did that in 2013, and I learned that we could choose our thoughts, that we have millions of thoughts, but really we can only choose 2% of them in any given moment. And so it's really important to actually choose what those thoughts are, and to be the controller of the driver of your thoughts, rather than allowing just thoughts to come to you. And so since then, I've really been intentional about just every single thought that I have, and that can be very empowering.
Yeah, gosh, Deiadora, this is the good stuff. I knew you'd go straight here this early on in our conversation. I think back, one of the most impactful books in my life, it's by Genevieve Davis. It's called Becoming Magic. And in that, she talks so much about, yes, we have to, one, be aware of our thoughts. Two, only then can we start choosing our thoughts. But the thing that was always hidden in the background to me, the more I read about this side of the world and who we are and how we show up and realizing our potential, identity keeps coming up, and it's something that I've played with, and I love exploring that as part of my own personal life as just a human, but also as an entrepreneur. And it's funny because we trick ourselves into believing that. I'll use one very tangible and somewhat silly example, but it's very true, is, Deiadora, I don't view myself as a runner. When people are like, oh, I'm a runner, I love going running after work, I'm not a runner. And so guess what, Deiadora? Every time I go for a run, I don't enjoy it because it is truly part of my identity. It's not just a choice that day. It's something I believe about myself. How much does identity play into this stuff? Because we can become or be whoever it is that we want to be, but we also have decades for those of us who are getting up there in age. I'm in my mid-30s now. I've got 36 years of experience of training myself into believing who I am.
Sure. Yeah. I have 40, so... So identity, the interesting part about identity is that you are actually not your identity. And how I would frame identity is your ego is your identification with your thoughts, your emotions, and your physical responses to everything that's happening outside of you, right? And when you start to become more mindful and intentional in your life, you're practicing mindfulness. What that is you're stepping back and you're actually looking at your identity. So it's the observer observing the observed. You're becoming more self-aware. And so when you step back and you look at your thoughts, transformation is the very act of actually becoming detached from your own identity and saying, I'm going to choose something different. For example, in the case of running, if you wanted to say that you were a runner, you can create the neuro pathways by saying affirmations to yourself every day. And after 28 days is the science behind it, that you would actually believe then that you were a runner. So your self-identity is malleable, and really we're growing over our lifetime. Thank God I'm not the same that I was when I was 3 or 12 or 28, right? But my identity has changed over time, and now I have more depth and breadth.
Yeah, I love the way you talk about that, especially things are malleable. The older I get, the more I realize that I'm not married to most things anymore. I know that my business is going to change over the next 12 months. This podcast has certainly changed over the course of 1,000 some odd episodes that we're at. And so it's something that we welcome instead of, I always love Deiadora. Societally, we almost paint a negative connotation to when someone's like, oh, so-and-so has changed. To your point, yeah, that's entirely the goal. And so when we talk about transformation, what I really love about your work, Deiadora, is that you don't just talk about these things within the personal life realm, but you also apply it to business. So I want to ask you, and it feels silly asking you this because I can already anticipate where you're going to go with it, the chicken or the egg? Everyone listening obviously wants to have a successful business. And so the question is, how do I grow my business? But also there's this factor at play called myself. How do I work on the two in tandem? Because they, of course, go hand in hand. What's the order of operations here?
Sure. I would say that each person is different. Like some people will have a greater external focus and be looking at things outside of themselves, while others are going to be more an internal, and they're going to be looking at their inner world first. I call that more self-focused, and neither is good or bad. So it's really actually honing in on the way that you process information. So if you are a strategist and you look outside of yourself, it's becoming aware of what those strategies are, for example, and questioning them and asking where those motivations are coming from. Asking what is the motivation, and is it a motivation that aligns with your values? Then that external processor would want to look at themselves and go, well, what are my values? And then what do I want to do? Whereas a person who is self-focused, you know your values and they're deeply entrenched in what you're doing. And so then you want to take those values and cross-apply them to your strategies. And aligning that inner and outer world will really help you to make a greater impact. I actually think that it helps you to attract more customers, to retain more customers, and to grow your business.
Yeah.
You can, go ahead.
No, go ahead. I love this train that you're on.
I was just going to say that you can actually also compare that to some entrepreneurs are better at scaling their businesses, which is where from my definition of scaling is like when you improve your business operations. So you're really good at putting teams together. You're good at managing your finances, like you have more CFO skills. You are excellent at refining your standard operational procedures and delegating. Those are all like the operational parts, right, of your entrepreneurialism. Whereas others are really good at the sales and the marketing strategies and attracting customers, and they love to go and speak, etc. So you have different parts of the business that come more naturally to you.
Yeah, Deiadora, I love hearing you talk about this because I find it is rare to see someone who so beautifully merges the two of these things that we typically separate. I mean, I think about business events, for example. You can go to the more awake and aware business type of events where they talk about the personal side of it, or you can go strictly to business conferences where they're going to talk about the tactics and the strategies. But it seems to me like you only have a playground where the two intertwine. And I think that that's really important, which leads me to ask you, what do your conversations look like when you talk to people who have never gone down this path before and they want to increase sales? Let's use that as an example. They want to get better at social media. They want to have a more effective website that converts more things. What's that conversation look like for you to show them the path of, hey, there's other things we need to address first as the foundation that will fuel everything else you're doing?
Right. Yeah. So in my consulting, I actually look at 8 different aspects of a small or medium-sized business. So I have all of those 8 different aspects. Some are internal, for our internal, and then for our external. And so when I'm listening to a CEO talking to me, I'm listening for all of those different aspects. I'm listening to where they're having issues. So they might want more sales, but they actually don't have the business operations set up so that will enable them to have more sales. Maybe they don't have enough personnel. And so I'm listening for the interconnection and the gaps that they have. I'm also actually listening for emotional disconnect. Where are they feeling more fear or doubt or worry about whatever is happening in their business? Where are they blaming others rather than taking self responsibility and feeling empowered about their abilities as a CEO? And are there any skill gaps that they need to work on, like refining their ability to delegate and to set up business operations with their team so that they can do more selling rather than focusing on the business operations, which isn't their passion? So I would say that I'm looking at them holistically, both in their business and in their personal development. And then I just choose one or the other where I feel there is a window of transformation where I can bring up what I think are the next steps that are really going to help their business to transform the fastest. And they could be internal things about themselves to help them to move through those blocks that they are actually putting up themselves. So that's the mindset. Or it is helping them to implement strategies that are going to help their business to grow or scale. And it just depends on the personality of the client.
Yeah, I love hearing that real life insight into your approach, because for me, the verbiage that I use internally anytime I want to be intentional is I always remind myself, take inventory of life, of business. And that's really what you're doing with those 8 categories, is you just have such a clear roadmap to first assess. It's really hard. I've always liked that concept of ready, aim, fire versus ready, fire, aim. Of course, that aim needs to come before we fire. And so that's super important. Deiadora, you've introduced us to some important business words, though. You've already brought up scale and operations and processes. And that leads me so easily into the player that we haven't talked about in your work yet, which is, of course, AI. This is an increasingly important player in all of our businesses. For you especially, I love that. Blending emotional intelligence with advanced AI strategies. Talk to me about your love for AI. Where's that come about, and how do you see it fitting into this landscape?
Yeah. So I actually started writing about conscious AI in 2015 in fiction work. And what I didn't realize that I was writing the story of, it was about a person that was working in tech and a writer in tech. And I became that writer in tech in product development, working at Coursera and Airbnb, and with many other startups and small businesses on their digital products. And I ended up actually embodying the same kind of teaching about mindfulness and emotional intelligence that I was writing about in fiction work in product development. And what I found was that I was working with product managers, product designers, engineers, and I was talking about how do we make this more human? How do you make it sound like you're having a conversation? Like, what really is content strategy and voice and tone? And as I did so, I actually found that I was talking about the same kind of transformation that I was talking about in my fiction work in these Zoom calls with all of my cross-collaboration teammates. And so in the past couple of years, I've developed what I call the quantum keys framework, which are 88 different emotional spectrums. For example, quantum key 1 is going from the negative emotion of fear to the positive emotion of courage by using the observer state of awareness. And if you think about any kind of digital product, if you get an error message, the best way to communicate in the user interaction, in what we call the UI in user experience, is through awareness and courage rather than through fear. So it's being uplifting to the user and helping them to be able to solve their problems. And so in this manual content strategy that I was doing for years, at Airbnb, I was able to implement a more conscientious, emotionally intelligent strategy for their help center. And I was able to train a large language model. So I found out that what I was teaching people, in these office hours was actually also applicable to creating a framework for artificial intelligence. And so now I teach people how to prompt engineer and what emotional intelligence is in really simple ways using that 88 quantum keys framework. And I show them how using different words to prompt. For example, I want my AI to be empowering, uplifting, and personable. And then I show them what that looks like when you implement those system instructions into the AI. So it's really applying emotional intelligence in a practical way.
Gosh, Deiadora, I love the way you laid all of that out, because these are complex topics that obviously you've put the years and you've had the practical experience in, and you are bringing it to us in a way that we can consume, and most importantly, a way that we can implement it into our own businesses. You bring up prompt engineering, and obviously this is an entirely new field that is a very important field. A lot of people are definitely not using ChatGPT, for example, or any large language model the way that you are. Talk to us about prompt engineering, because I see too many entrepreneurs, especially the newer entrepreneurs, who their prompt engineering will say, I own a web design agency, give me 50 ideas for social media content. And then it spits something out. And we live in a world, Deiadora, I've long argued that it's going to be easier to stand out because most people are doing exactly that. And so if you do things differently, you're going to stand out across all the same generic content that everyone's putting out these days. From your perspective, you're the expert here. What are people doing wrong when it comes to prompt engineering, and what would you rather see them be doing?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I think that I'll say that there's two ends of the spectrum, right? There's people that are using generative AI. And if you use a large language model like ChatGPT or Claude or Gemini, and you just ask it to write me those, 50 different social media ideas or social media posts, you are not telling it exactly where to come from. You're not giving it a content strategy. And in AI, we call the content strategy the system instructions. So you can actually get a large language model to sound more like your brand by firstly having brand guidelines. Your brand guidelines want to define what your voice is. And you can think of the voice as, for example, if you're making a social media post and you are a marketing expert, you want to actually tell it what its role is, because this is a database of information that is huge, and it's just going to sound very generic, and it's probably going to give you some rocket emojis and a bunch of other emojis. You actually want to tell it, don't use any emojis, use bullet points, use plain language, which is like 6th to 8th grade language. Communicate in, like I said, you want to give they call it tone mapping in content strategy. So emotional words like personable, authentic, fun. And you want to actually tell it, write like I am a marketing expert on LinkedIn, and then have it give you 50 different ideas. But once you have those ideas, the other end of the spectrum is not just to pump out that information. It's not just to copy and paste it. It's actually to go through it and to use it as your GPT as a collaborative partner. And to take a step back, this is the practicing mindfulness in action, right? Take a step back and go, okay, now which ones do I think will actually resonate with my audience? Let's look at what posts worked in the past. I'm going to look at my data-driven insights, my analytics, and then which ones feel right. I'm going to use my intuition, and I'm going to use this data, and I'm going to use my emotional intelligence to see what I think are really going to connect with my audience. And I'm going to pick the best ones. and I'm going to actually rewrite them. So I call it zhuzhing. You want to zhuzh them and use AI as an interactive partner. And that's the more human aspect. So you can just use it on the one end of the spectrum and pump things out, or you can be an editor and to use it as a collaborative partner and a tool.
Yeah, Deiadora, hearing you talk about all this stuff, obviously I know your background as a content creator. It just seems to me, I picture you now as someone who is a conductor, where you have all of these tools in front of you and you're using them to get so much stuff done. And I knew it would show up in the way that you talk about things here today, but I want you to go down this path for listeners who haven't read through your messaging and haven't been to your website just yet, because I love the term strategic laziness. Deiadora, you've got to talk about that, because we're talking about getting more stuff done, but you're really revealing so much of your productivity strategy to us today. So what the heck is strategic laziness?
Strategic laziness. Well, I'll be honest, I actually have ADHD. So in that neurodiversity, I find that I really have to be focused and intentional about everything that I do, or my mind works too quickly and I get absolutely nothing done. And so I've developed a ton of different strategies, which are, a lot of them are based in mindfulness practices, to be able to be more intentional. And I find that when I do that, and I've applied it to business consulting and content strategy, and even I've handcrafted product for a large community in Southern California when I lived there. So it works in all different kinds of entrepreneurial practices and in your personal life, to be able to simply focus on fewer things, that by scattering your energy across a bunch of different stuff that maybe you're not really even that great at, you're just doing it because you feel like you have to. A lot of the times when there's just a handful of people working for a small business, that happens a lot. Or if you're a content designer in product development, that happens a lot as well. So I've had many experiences where you're spread too thin. But I find that time and time again, that just by focusing on, for example, the two or three income producing activities that are really going to move the needle for you today as an entrepreneur, that is actually more beneficial. It's more beneficial to work 6-hour days with focused intention than it is to work 12 hours and to do a bunch of different stuff that doesn't really help you to move forward. It's better to focus on a handful of quality leads than it is to send out 100 cold emails using AI. So it's strategic laziness at the heart of it is focusing your intention and really just bringing your awareness and your team's awareness to the things that are going to be the most important to you.
Yeah, I love that. Deiadora, I'll tell you this, within the soccer world, some players have been criticized over the years because they look lazy on the field, but I'll never forget this one player who scored all the goals, but other than scoring goals, he didn't do much on the field. And so when a journalist asked him about how he does that, he said, efficiency is intelligent laziness. And I've never forgotten that quote, because that's really what it's about. I mean, you revealed it in that answer right there. Let's figure out the 2 to 3 things that move the needle and strip everything else away, but get really laser focused and do those things very well. So I appreciate hearing those insights. I want to switch gears a little bit towards the end of this conversation, because I also want to get inside your mind as a fellow entrepreneur. You are also one of us growing your own business. And I think it's so cool the various ways that you serve your clients. You offer coaching, you've got workshops, you've got courses coming up. Deiadora, talk to us about all the ways you've structured this, because a lot of businesses need help. And I think it's so cool the ways that you've been able to help them based on where they are, whether it's based on affordability, based on intimacy of that one-on-one relationship. Tell us more about what it looks like to work with someone like you.
Sure. So working with me, what I have found and the way that my business model is structured is based on customer feedback. So I'm really listening for what works the best for my different target markets, which are mostly entrepreneurs, content professionals, and creators. And I find that people digest information differently. So some people want to have one-on-one coaching with me, and that will expand into working with their team. And then other individuals like to do the 4-hour workshops and to get a playbook by the end of it. Whereas others are more self-paced. So I've had a lot of people ask me if I would build courses out. And really, I would say that I'm a guide. And so I'm helping people to digest information in different ways. And it depends on what their mental model is and their preference of learning. And so I try to suit the different teachings that I have to those different customer bases.
Yeah, I love that overview. And as a fellow entrepreneur, I really appreciate the intentionality and the strategy behind what you've set up to serve different people. Because as you said, everyone has those different needs. And I think it's important for all of us in our own businesses, you all listeners, you just heard from Deiadora, the way that she has structured those different offerings, even time commitment. Deiadora brought that up in that answer there. It's so intentional about the way she approaches this. We all need that in our own businesses. So Deiadora, you've been a wealth of knowledge. I'm pretty sure we could continue this episode for 8 more hours. However, I want to squeeze a couple more questions in. And the question I ask at the end of all of these episodes is, what's your one best piece of advice for entrepreneurs, for wantrepreneurs that are at all different stages of their business growth? What's that one thing that you want to impart on them today?
I would say that if you want to be a mindful entrepreneur, take a step back and become aware of your thoughts, your emotions, and your physical responses before you take any action.
Yes, I love that. We are action-focused entrepreneurs, but stepping back. It's counterintuitive for a lot of people, but that's where you'll start to see that more macro picture. So I so appreciate that. Deiadora, before I kick it back to you to drop some links on us for where listeners can go from here, I want to invite listeners, if you want to go down this path further with Deiadora, all the brilliant things that she shares. As someone who has checked out her content, it's incredible, all the different topics and the depth in which she goes on all of these. The good news is, like I said at the top of today's episode, she's a fellow podcaster. Her podcast is called The Quantum CEO with Deiadora Blanche. Deiadora, I'm so excited for listeners to go further. So drop those links on us. Where should listeners go to find all the great things that you're up to, including your book? I'm also going to prime you there for also telling them about your book.
Sure, yeah. So you can go to Deiadorebel Life and find the link to my YouTube and all of my podcast platforms that I share the podcast on.
And your book, Deiadora, I want you to prep that as well. I think it's so cool what you put together.
Yeah, and my strategic laziness is available to the end of the year at launch price on my website as a digital download, and it will soon be available in print as well.
Yes, I love that. So listeners, truly, Deiadora has made it very easy to go down her rabbit hole of all the great things that she's putting into the world. You'll see when you go to her website, which you'll find that link down below, you'll see an overview of everything that she does, her view on AI, how to use it, how to get access to the quantum potential way of working this, including the 88 quantum keys framework that she introduced us to today. So definitely check the link down in the show notes. You'll find all of those. We're also linking to Deiadora's personal LinkedIn. So if you just want to reach out and continue the conversation with her, don't be shy. Most podcast listeners are. We talked a little bit about standing out in a crowded marketplace, being an action taker, reaching out to people, growing your network. That's one way to do so. So Deiadora, on behalf of myself and all the listeners worldwide, thanks so much for coming on the show today.
Thank you, Brian.